So, welcome, guys, to another edition of the Builders Club podcast. Today's guest is someone who quietly sits at the intersection where healthcare technology and commercial strategy meet and actually makes things move. Ashwin Chandramouli leads portfolio growth strategy and business development at Baxter International, where he has spent nearly 5 years shaping their connected care ecosystem. He works on the kind of digital health innovation that most hospitals desperately need, but rarely know how to evaluate: interoperability, workflow tech, commercial strategy, and the whole stack. He's launched multiple solutions that have driven strong digital double digit revenue growth. But what really stands out is how he reads the market dynamics and gets buy in across plans, cross functional teams, and senior leadership. In an industry where everything is slow and layered, Ashwin seems to have cracked the code on momentum. Welcome, Ashwin. Welcome to the Builders Club.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on here.
Okay, so Ashwin, I think we'll just kick it off with a little bit about your background. Tell me a little bit about your early life, your childhood. Where did you grow up? What did you study?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the Chicago land area. That's a city in the U.S. here in Illinois. Grew up in the suburbs here. Normal childhood. Two parents, two siblings. Really fun kind of area that we live in. I actually moved back recently, so I live in the same town that I grew up in. So it's a bit of a different perspective now with being my own as a parent myself now. It's a very different perspective on how I look at things. I currently am a parent of two, spouse. We live in the same city here. Growing up, an emphasis on education, really kind of building knowledge when I was growing up. My dad used to always say, like, your brain is something that no one else can take away from you. You could just continue to grow that over time. And then, spending quality time with family has been kind of a very important factor in my life. I love work, but I also love my family and kind of spending time with them. At the end of the day, that's kind of the most important thing from my perspective. And then my parents just taught me a couple of like very good life lessons, right? Like whenever you're going to go after something, go after it hard, right? Make it a goal, go after it hard, make sure that you're kind of putting all your effort into doing that. And then constantly just be curious, try new things. You never know what's going to stick. I've been in healthcare officially with the last kind of decade or so, but I like to think that I've been in healthcare my whole life. My dad's a radiologist. He's recently retired, but I also have family members that have been in medicine. So I've been kind of around healthcare and medicine pretty much my whole life, and there's always been an innate interest in it. Didn't start off in this industry, but ultimately I've ended up in it, and I think this is the one that's going to stick. So,
Having parents who are a part of medicine kind of opens up a different kind of perspective when you look at healthcare. But I think you are a part of the business side of things in healthcare, and that's very different from the practice side of healthcare. So right now you're in Baxter, so would love to know a little bit about your journey.
yeah, I'll take a couple steps back. So, just to kind of give you context as to how I even got into the industry and why it was kind of it made sense as the next path. So I started off early in my career after undergraduate to go into investment banking. And I was in that career for a few years. And so I really kind of enjoyed my experience there, really kind of driving a lot of that deal flow with investors and businesses. But what I learned very quickly was that I really liked the operating side of it. So the companies we were working with, I kind of was like, it was a missing link for me on we would complete the deal and then we'd kind of move on to the next deal. But for me, I'm like, what are they going to do with that funding? How are they going to utilize it? What's like the puts and takes on running the business, right? And so for me, that became kind of an impetus to really think about switching careers, which I did. I went to business school and then post business school went into the consumer packaged goods industry. And I really learned kind of the puts and takes of a P&L, right? Like, how do you drive top line revenue? what are those levers to really drive top line revenue through innovation, through organic growth on your core businesses, and then COGS, really thinking about cost productivity and really those initiatives to really drive out costs from your business, which ultimately all impact your bottom line, right? And really learning those kind of puts and takes, those levers that really help drive the business, really gave me a good understanding of how to run the business. So I was essentially a general manager that really drove those businesses. But as I said earlier, my innate interest in healthcare has been kind of a lifelong thing. I'd always kind of had curiosity on what could this experience being kind of getting the analytical foundation within investment banking, moving into really running a business and a P&L within consumer packaged goods look like within healthcare. So there was an innate interest in moving to healthcare. I focused my attention around healthcare technology, so digital health, and really kind of thinking about how I can move my way and migrate into that space. That was an interest and passion of mine. So I started at Abbott Diagnostics, really focused on commercial execution and go-to-market strategy. So really thinking about how do we drive individual opportunities and initiatives to deliver some of these digital solutions to our lab customers. That was where our core focus was. So lab diagnostic customers within hospital systems. And I was focused on really positioning, messaging, and then working really closely with our sales partners to deliver opportunities to that team. So that was kind of my experience at Abbott. Again, all of these kind of build on each other, more down on the downstream marketing side. I felt like I wanted to get closer to the actual patient within healthcare. So this was the lab. I don't say this, I say this somewhat facetiously, but the lab quite literally and figuratively was in the basement of most organizations. And so I wanted to get closer to the patient. I wanted to really kind of drive technologies and solutions that would actually more directly impact, I should say, patient outcomes and patient healthcare delivery. So I moved into a company called Hillrom at the time, which they're mostly known for like their smart bed and surface portfolio. So really thinking about how to deliver information from the beds because the patients lie in there, data to the clinicians on how to better take care of those patients. That's their core portfolio. I was focused on kind of a data integration layer almost, and really kind of taking all of that information from our beds, patient monitors, like if you've heard of Welch Allen, it's a like monitoring vitals and what have you, taking that information and be able to deliver it to those end users to be able to risk stratify, right? So be able to take that information and say, these are the patients we need to focus on today or immediately, and be able to conduct their care accordingly based on that prioritization. So I've kind of moved through multiple roles within Baxter, within the product realm, so more on the upstream side, and really thinking about technology. I think to answer your initial question, which is how do you think about technologies in the facet of from a business perspective versus necessarily practicing medicine, I honestly think they go hand in hand. You can't leave out the clinical and operational workflows that already exist within these healthcare systems to the side and then just try to introduce a new technology. We truly believe that there's a way that you need to marry up the technology and integrate it more as seamlessly as possible without too much change management or too much behavior change to allow a user to use that technology in the way that they would normally use it on a day-to-day basis, maybe just making things more efficient or more effective, right? If you start changing, this is where I think we get it wrong a lot of times from a technology perspective, is we try to just introduce a shiny object. And that shiny object doesn't necessarily seamlessly work or fit within a workflow. And you don't get the adoption that you need to help drive utilization of your product. Because you don't get adoption, you don't drive value for your customers. And if you don't drive value, you don't drive renewals. So that's how we need to really think about it. The adoption is the linchpin for you to think about revenue, kind of either growing your revenue base or retaining your revenue base. And so that's ultimately, again, everything's within the workflows. Everything's about the workflows that our clinical and our operational partners at health systems really think about. So probably a long-winded answer, but hopefully that gave you a little bit of understanding of how we try to think about things.
I want to understand the blueprint of how the different pieces of the different stakeholders actually talk to each other, and how and where all do you think technology is currently having the maximum kind of impact in these interoperability of these partners.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a very tough question. I'll be very candid just starting off, because the complexity of like any individual sale, we have to think about these stakeholders, almost compartmentalize them and think about how we would even position our product, message what we do, what the value stream is, because any research that you do across these health systems, you'll see different needs. Like they might pop up as needs across each of these stakeholders, but the prioritization of those needs changes depending on who you're talking to. This, if you're talking to C-suite versus maybe an end user, right? They may have similar things as to what they're looking for, but they just would they would reprioritize how they would think about those needs. I would also say there's also the aspect of the individual, like as you go down the levels from like C-suite all the way down to end user, there's a lot of layers in between that have different things that they think about as well, right? So the way we kind of break this out is we have clinical kind of partnerships and clinical folks that we focus on, and they're going to have a set of needs that we really that they think about from a value perspective, and we have to think about how we position ourselves to them. There's going to be operational, right? Like, okay, this is like our procurement folks. Are we a standard technology that they already have? Is this something that they can just kind of plug in? Are they going to have to create a new agreement with us? Like, there's a lot of different things that you have to think through when you're talking to those stakeholders. And then there's the folks with the purse strings, right? The financial partners, which probably is a lot of folks within the C-suite, but there's usually committees, buying committees, as it relates to how they purchase these technologies. And how you position yourself with each of these stakeholders becomes a bit more of kind of an art than a science on how you actually position yourself. So
Interesting.
Does that answer that question?
It's a start. So
Yeah.
When you talk, which of these bits is where you're seeing technology moving the fastest right now? Because now I think the whole world is getting into a technology overdrive, and healthcare moves the slowest.
Yep.
One of the slowest ecosystem and industries in which technology adoption happens, because of course, there's a logical reason why it moves slow, because there are human lives involved, right? And there are legacy systems you don't want to break. If something is working, you don't want to disrupt that. But which of these parts is where you're seeing technology moving the fastest?
I think so. To me, the way I look at our healthcare partners, it is B2B, right? For the most part, it is business to business selling. But it's very interesting, because to me, these business partners are also consumers, right? So a lot of the technology that we're looking at from a Baxter perspective is technology that they may even be using in their personal lives, right? For example, this product that we're launching called VoltLink is a wearable badge that they use your voice for. Its voice assistants have been around with Siri, Alexa, Google for quite some time now. So there's a bit of an understanding and appreciation for how that technology can help them in their personal lives. So it becomes a bit of an easier gap to kind of like leap over, to be able to say, well, now you can use this within healthcare to be able to conduct your business, your professional work, take care of your patients. Maybe even think about this from a workflow optimization perspective to be able to do things that you would do at home, right? Turning on your lights, for example, at home, right? That's an example of why can't we bring those kinds of things into the hospital setting? I think that type of technology is a little bit easier to understand, right? Because it's something that maybe some of these folks are already using in their personal lives. To me, that's where I think you can leapfrog some of the adoption. I've heard numbers like, for example, technology takes 17 years to become standard of care, right? Something along those lines within healthcare. And there's reasons for that. I think when you talk about medical devices, like you said, people's lives are at risk, right? You don't want a pacemaker that just was newly introduced to get into, the human body. And if it fails, you can't fail fast here because that's someone's life, right? But I think with some of the other technology around software, with digital health, these are things that aren't necessarily medical devices. And there's an opportunity to kind of move more quickly, especially if it's relevant or related to what they're potentially using in their personal lives, right? And I think those are the technologies that will get moved a lot more quickly. We're also seeing things around video and how the use of video within the healthcare setting can actually optimize an understanding of like contextual cues within a room. Like patient trying to get out of bed, for example. We have this concept called that patients may be at a falls risk, meaning they're either like really ill, you don't want them getting out of bed. They're post anesthesia, you don't want them getting out of bed, right? Because they're a little wobbly. So there's this idea of like, well, can you put cameras in the room that help automate and understand if that patient is going to be in the process of getting out of bed, so you can proactively try to send somebody in. So video is something that we do use in our daily lives as well, right? It's a concept that people understand. This is just adding, AI, and I know we're probably going to talk about AI probably further in our conversation, but just in terms of like using algorithms to understand how the human body's moving, the contextual environmental cues within a hospital room that allow clinicians to be able to conduct their workflows more effectively and potentially even proactively or automate it, right? If you see somebody getting out of bed, instead of somebody, that person pressing a button, there's an alert that's sent out automatically that allows somebody to come into that room more immediately to potentially prevent a fall in that case.
Interesting. Interesting. Why I want to know a little bit more about Baxter in general, and how, because of course, Baxter does a lot of stuff. I want to know a little bit more about how Baxter is structured. What are the different divisions? How are you people structured? What all are you working on? What kind of solutions do you provide? And who are your stakeholders?
Yeah. So there's a lot that we're kind of focused on across the board. Baxter has kind of evolved into a pretty different company these days. Really kind of no longer really a pharma company. It's more focused on med devices. Our infusion pump business, we've got that. We've got our bed business with the acquisition of Hillrom. And so we're primarily a medical device organization. And really this overlay of kind of connecting the dots between the data points that these devices can deliver, as well as really kind of pushing that data to end users, is really where we're focused. So this is where I kind of talked about that data integration layer, right? Where we can pull in all this device data from various different sources, pumps, patient monitors, beds, right? There's an opportunity to really take that information, make it actionable, insightful, and then actionable by our clinicians. So I'll give you one prime example for our bed portfolio. There's sensors in the bed that can allow to kind of detect continuous heart rate and respiratory rate. These are key vital signs that clinicians use to kind of really help them understand whether there could be potential patient deterioration. So you could use those data points, because that's where the patient's lying, right? Continuously monitored, and allow it to get pushed to a system that gets aggregated with different data from the EMR, maybe structured, unstructured data, and allows those clinicians to get a better picture of what's happening with that patient in real time. So if you think about how normal protocols or workflows happen in the hospital, they'll do their cadence rounds with patients. They'll take those vitals, they'll document them in the EMR, but once they leave the room, those vitals are now stale, right? So what we can do is we can supplement this with more real-time data to allow those clinicians more real-time access to those data points, giving a more real-time picture of those individual patients. So what Baxter's trying to do is really kind of couple these data points to be able to push them to the clinicians to allow them to act on it in a more real-time fashion that maybe previously, again, they were working with old or stale data to really do their job. So effectively, I say this with it, like, because it's a very fine thread, right? Because there's so much noise within hospitals. Be able to tie this to specific patient outcomes becomes very difficult. And because of that, we're very cautious to say that we improve patient outcomes directly, right? Because ultimately, it's a factor of things. It's not only if we deliver that data to the clinician, it's if the clinician acts on that data in sufficient time, goes into the patient room to maybe avoid deterioration, that you can almost tie that all the way through to some sort of improved patient outcome. So this is the complexity where, if you think about tech in the consumer world, it's a lot easier to tie value through in terms of consumer does X and then outcome Y happens. In the hospital setting, there's so many other factors that are at play, right? Did the nurse come see you on time? Did the doctor diagnose you properly? Have you given the doctor full patient history so that they can come up with the right diagnosis? There's a lot more variables, which actually makes it very exciting from my perspective, because these are pretty large problems to solve. But it also makes it a lot more complicated to really tie value through all the way through, because there's so many different variables within the setting. In the consumer world, you may be able to press a button and say, because that person pressed the button, I was able to tie this to, a click into an advertisement that allowed me to calculate an ROI that said they bought the product after that. You know what I mean? It becomes a lot easier to tie that thread of value. In the hospital world, it's a little harder to do that.
So you are technically enabling the clinicians, or dare I say doctors specifically?
Yeah, providers, nurses, hospital staff in general. We look at ourselves as selling an enterprise solution. So we want to work for everyone within the healthcare system. And that's, so everyone has access potentially to this, assuming they have the right endpoints. So like whether it be a mobile phone or a dashboard that they have access to, or they have the permissions to be able to access this within their desktop. There's opportunities to kind of push that data to them in a medium that makes sense for them.
So you people are technically the OS for a hospital or a healthcare ecosystem, is it?
You can see that. Yeah, it's we like to think of ourselves as kind of the real-time operating layer, if you will, right? Because we can not only aggregate, right? We can infuse with additional data points that allow those clinicians to understand what's happening more real time. We believe we can become that operating system that's more real time than things like the EMR, which we believe is more of a repository that allows, it's an important repository because it's the clinical record, it's how they get paid, right? It's more of a finance system in my mind than it is a clinical workflow and healthcare delivery system. I know that those folks are really thinking about this differently and maybe trying to move into that space a little bit more efficiently. But this is where I think we can kind of add value, is there is device data that could be important and could be utilized by these clinicians that allow them to act upon something more real time that we can deliver to that ecosystem that an EMR just doesn't have access to because it's through us, right? We would have to deliver that.
Got it. Got it. And that brings me to the whole world of AI, because I think you people are the ones who are dealing with both data as well as experience in general, with clinicians, and doctors usually are not that tech savvy. I mean,
Yep.
at least from what we know of. I want to get a little bit of a hang about how is AI. I mean, what is the problem that AI can solve in the ecosystem, and then the applications that we're seeing right now of this amazing technology which we have at hand right now.
Yeah. So my take on this, couple of things, right? I think there's been a data overload and it's continued over time within the healthcare ecosystem of you just think about the enormous amount that our providers, nurses, right, have to absorb and the kind of I would say sometimes maybe even unnecessary data points that they don't even need to consider, and they're inundated with things day in and day out from all of these monitors, from the patient family, from the patient themselves, right? Data points from maybe their education or research that they've done. It's hard to keep up with all of that, right?
Mm.
I see AI as a tool that allows you, and especially thinking about the product that I'm delivering, it's a tool that allows you to query that information as a normal person would query it. Like ask a question and the data gets surfaced to you in a way that makes sense to you versus you having to do the data scouring and kind of aggregation yourself. AI can do that for you. Then instead you take the insight or the whatever information's kind of surfaced to you based on that information that you got, you're able to kind of cut out all of the first couple of steps in aggregating, in basically creating a repository for you to understand what the data is, and then ultimately actioning on that data. So it really takes out a few steps for some of these clinicians that I believe will expedite their process in taking care of patients. We can have conversations about um, does this mean anything as it relates to headcount reductions and what have you? I don't think that's going to be the case right away. I mean, our healthcare providers and staff are overburdened as it is. You probably have heard about nursing shortages and cognitive burden overload. Um, these are outstanding problems that the healthcare industry is dealing with as a whole. Retention is becoming a huge issue. We're seeing a huge attrition of nurses leaving because I think the pandemic expedited a lot of things, but there is a burnout factor that's occurring because there's less nurses coming in. It's just a self-fulfilling prophecy where less nurses means more workload, and then you're going to continue to have less nurses and less nurses. So I think a lot of healthcare systems, as I've talked to customers about this, AI is going to fill a gap to be able to fill those voids that you have in between of like covering for some of these shortages. There may be an end goal of like replacing at some point, but I think we're at least a little ways away from that. But in the interim, it's a workforce and workflow productivity tool that allows them to just do their jobs potentially faster and more effectively because they are now able to scour all of the data points that they need to do their jobs versus maybe a portion of it. Again, the technology companies need to be able to surface that up though, right? In a way that's trustworthy, that the end user can have confidence in, right? That needs to kind of happen hand in hand with the end user using the information.
Any specific instance or any immediate use cases which you're seeing of AI right now, which is right now under deployment or already been deployed in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I can say so. Ambient technology has kind of been out there. You've probably heard of Microsoft with their Nuance DAX product, Abridge, Suki, right? Some of the Nabla, some of these other voice technology companies. This has already been deployed within the kind of the outpatient setting, quite prevalently across the outpatient setting,
What do they
where
do?
doctors. Yeah, so it's like ambient technology is essentially the ability to kind of gather information. So I'll just walk through the workflow. Doctor will pull out their phone. There's an app, right? It'll record essentially a session or stream a session. Again, their architecture can change depending on the company. But essentially, they take that session and they translate that full session into structured kind of data points or history of those individual patients. Right now, providers essentially kind of notate things, or they're just sitting in front of the computer to basically take all this information down that's required to take this patient history. This technology just allows, just like we're having here, a free-flowing conversation about, and this technology will pull out the pertinent data points and basically push it into a report that could
Mm.
get pushed in the electronic medical record.
But the specificity of the the nomenclature needs to be right, because that's where, it can't be 80-90%. It has to be like 99% accurate.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
is it solving that problem right now? Is it accurate
Yes.
now?
At least from my understanding, yes. This isn't a technology that we have in the outpatient space. We're really focused on the inpatient.
Got
But
it.
the
Interesting.
Yeah, but there is technology that does this. The other kind of there is a human in the loop here that that provider does have to check the note, make sure everything's accurate. There's dictation technologies have been out there for a long time,
Of
but
course, yeah.
that's verbatim, right? That's verbatim, just translate,
Just
transcribe.
summarizing and making sense.
Yes, yes,
Does it
exactly.
also help in diagnosis?
Yes, and that's kind of what I was getting to earlier is like that's where AI technology could really help. Instead of the provider having to structure this and spending time structuring this, they can now spend more time looking at the report and gathering insights and maybe saying, you know what, based on this information, we need to do X with the patient instead of Y. And they're spending more time doing that. Think of it like doctors are humans as well, right? So if they're spending time constructing the note or constructing the report, they're probably going to be spending less time actually looking at the report, reviewing it, analyzing it, and seeing what they could do differently potentially with that patient. Now they spend basically no time creating the report, and they can spend those extra minutes doing something a bit more productive that allows them to think about how they can treat that patient differently, or
It's like
maybe not. Yeah,
it's like a smart assistant.
exactly. Exactly. And
Correct.
that's where I see, again, this is close to home because this is how we're thinking about things on the inpatient side as well, across many different workflows, right? We're not only thinking about this within the space of clinical, but also operational, right? How do you get
Of
patients
course.
in out of rooms more quickly? This is where you can start tying threads into um, potential revenue generation for, hospitals are for-profit companies for the most part, right? And so if they can see more volume, usually that means higher reimbursement, which means higher revenue, right? And so if they can turn those rooms faster, that usually means there's an opportunity to do that. So I've seen this technology also be utilized within their revenue cycle management space. Essentially, are you familiar with the revenue cycle management space?
Little bit, but of course, it'll be good if you can deep dive into it as well.
Yeah, so it's essentially getting from patient care to payment is really the way to think about it, right? So patient care happens. How quickly can you turn that into actually cash in hand, right? So that's the revenue cycle management. There's a lot of puts and takes with payers on authorizations, denials, right? And finally getting a reimbursement approved. then ultimately getting paid on that. That timeline has been pretty long for quite some time with a lot of our customers. They're utilizing voice now is, make the notes associated with these payments, because all of these clinical notes, and this is kind of why I facetiously said EMRs are like finance systems, if you will, because they're ultimately used to get, payment. That's what they're used. Like all that information in there gets submitted to payers, allows them to understand what's the right reimbursement codes to get paid on, and then that's how the hospitals get reimbursed. And so, from that perspective, this could close the gap in terms of the time frame that if you have, I should say, kind of go back. Clinical documentation integrity is something that a lot of these customers are focused on, because if you have cleaner notes and more high quality notes, that could lead to faster payment ultimately.
Interesting.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so that there's multiple avenues where voice technology ultimately leads to downstream impact that allows hospitals to ultimately improve top line.
Interesting. What is the biggest pain point that you see in a hospital, which you believe is still to be solved, and it's a major bottleneck, but nothing has been done yet?
Um, that's a loaded question, because there's a lot, I would say. Again, probably looking at this through the US lens, I think there's a couple of big areas. So the number one line item on any hospital P&L is their labor, the cost of their labor. Okay, so the fact that there's this nursing shortage, there's this burnout, people potentially even leaving the field. There's a huge pressure point and a headwind for the industry on trying to get these clinicians, providers, the tools that they need to do their jobs more effectively, but also reduce burnout so that they remain in the field, remain potentially even employed by that specific company, that healthcare system. To me, that's the number one, and that's where we're focused a lot of our attention, because without labor, you right now you can't operate a hospital. So that to me is kind of number one. I think the number two headwind that is kind of, and this is probably more of a U.S. lens, Sohail. So I can't necessarily speak to the global lens
No,
on this
let's
lens.
talk about US only. Let's talk about US
Yeah.
only.
And so the payer landscape has kind of evolved over time. There's been new bills that have been introduced that are actually going to reduce like reimbursement for a lot of our hospital systems, which is going to put pressure on top line for a lot of our customers. So this is why you're probably seeing a lot more emphasis on how do we get technologies like AI to fill the gap and allow the labor that we do have to do more work, right? Because you can't hire more people. You have to like almost while top line is getting reduced, in order for you to maintain bottom line, you have to think about cost cutting measures. And like I said, labor is the biggest number one spend typically of most healthcare systems. You can't cut people because you don't have people to cut. So what are the opportunities to kind of think about? What are the opportunities to think about how you can utilize technologies to reduce your COGS at the same time that these reimbursement cuts are coming? Because the only way to kind of offset reimbursement is increasing volumes, right? Less reimbursement, more volumes, you get a similar revenue. It's hard to just replace that with more patient volume. So now they're seeing the same number of patients. Census is typically pretty high. So you're familiar with the concept of census, right? Which is your patient volumes at any given time. Most of these hospitals are running pretty high. I'll just say like 80, 90%. Yeah. There's not a lot more capacity to take on additional patients is really the bottom line. And so because of that, they can't just improve by increasing volumes. They have to figure out different ways to improve bottom line. And it's usually going to fall to the cost productivity side. How do we reduce COGS in order for us to meet the bottom line that we were continually doing before? That's ultimately what they're going to have to think about. This is where this AI technology really can play a role. Why a lot of these healthcare systems are so gung ho about it is because they think it can fill a gap. How quickly it does, like you said, I think there's time will tell, because it really, like I said, it's about adoption, really adoption leading to driving purchase, to driving ultimately renewals. So to me, that's where I think the two big headwinds are probably there, and I think those are the ones that come top of
I
mind
think I
right
think
now.
I think you people are more focused on making sure that the health personnel are working at the maximum optimized capacity. You're
Yes,
increasing their efficiency basically,
workflow
and
optimization.
making them more equipped with the right kind of tools so that they can do their work more efficiently,
And with the right
and
data.
probably also helping in reducing the workload. Yeah,
Yeah, and I would just say with the right data as well, the right
the right
data
data.
or information, so that they can do their jobs.
But I want to understand the Baxter organization in general now, because I think it's one of the largest enterprises out there in the life sciences ecosystem. More than what, 30, 40,000 employees, if I'm not wrong, globally. And I'm fascinated by how big models work, right? Because it's like a big machine working in unison, and everything is working perfectly. And trust me, having just a like 15, 20 member team, I can very well understand. I mean, I just want to understand, how do you people, and of course you're also one of the people in the machinery. I want to understand, how does the organization work? Are there any best practices in terms of an org structure, or within the culture perspective, people perspective? How do you see Baxter? How does it operate in general? If you can help me understand that.
You know, so I'll kind of take this in a couple different ways.
Yeah.
If you think about the traditional like med device or pharma company, um, they have typically you're structured around like a specific product or group of products that you're focused on revenue generation. So if you think about like from a corporate structure, you want to basically have your organization structured where potentially each individual kind of business unit is delivering revenue and potentially margin accretive to the overall margin of your portfolio, right? You treat it like a portfolio is essentially how you would do it. Um, so like in this case, our pump business is kind of its own business unit. Our beds and our patient monitors are two different business units, right? We also have a surgical unit, which actually gets lumped in with our beds as well, because it's really around services and beds. And so that's how it's been historically structured, is you want each one of those, they each have their own P&L that they're delivering on, and they're really driving. The curveball that's been thrown in is when you talk about connectivity and connected care, it becomes a bit harder to do it that way. I'll just put it that way. And the reason being, you're better together versus trying to do connected care within beds, trying to do connected care within NP, like within our infusion pump business, and then in our patient monitoring business. There's a layer of like, I'll call it, it's like the mortar. When you're thinking about building a house, it's the mortar that helps the bricks all kind of stick together, right? So you can't think of it in its own silo, right? You got to think about it across the business, and you're going to be stronger together, right? That's ultimately the kind of how you need to be thinking about it. So connectivity has kind of thrown a bit of a monkey wrench into how the org structure um, needs to be put in place. And I'll be very candid. I don't know if we've necessarily figured it out yet. Um, I don't know if any company's necessarily just figured it out. I think there's a bit of trial and error to kind of figure out, how do we manage across the organization this kind of horizontal when we've been very vertically oriented for a long time. And I'll tell you, like it regardless of kind of the structure, and your reporting lines, what I found is just you have to collaborate. You have to have trust. You have to assume positive intent across the business units. Um, Agendas may be different, right? Because priorities might be different, strategies might be different, but you have to assume positive intent, and you have to have trust in your colleagues and be able to collaborate across any division, um, so that you can kind of bring this connected story to life. And that's what I've learned is like you can't just live in a box or in a silo. You have to truly build kind of stakeholders across the organization, regardless of organization that they're in, because that's where we're gonna win together versus trying to figure this out on our own. And I think a lot of organizations, unfortunately, because I've been at Abbott and Hillrom and Baxter, it's a bit of trial and error to be honest with you, to figure out the right org structure, because I don't know if there is a perfect one yet. I haven't necessarily seen one that says like, yep, this is it. You should just follow this roadmap and just figure it out. Because it's a bit different with these device companies. They're focused so heavily on capital sales within these devices. That's where, I mean, let's be honest, that's what's keeping the lights on for
Yeah,
all
of
these companies.
course. Of course.
Connectivity is a strategic imperative to continue to create stickiness with your devices, create stickiness with your business, right? It may not be the revenue generator today, the major revenue generator, but if you build this right in the right way, I believe you can have a durable, sustainable revenue base through your software offerings, but it'll take time. With any other software company, right? It takes time to build that durable revenue base. Um, Versus capital, you can come out with a new med device next year, right? And year one revenue could be in the tens of millions of dollars, if not higher, right?
Have you people started using AI in any form? And you personally also, as a professional, have you found any use cases where I think AI is making your life simpler as a professional?
Yeah, so we've introduced, I think, like many other companies, Microsoft Copilot chat. So I use that within my workplace to kind of, I almost use it as kind of another assistant, a sounding board, right? Like, hey, I'm thinking about things this way. Um,
Mm.
it doesn't have right now. We're still, I would say, early stages where it doesn't have access to a lot of my Microsoft Office tools.
Mm.
So this is still very much kind of isolated from that ecosystem right now. We're looking at moving towards that ecosystem at some point here. Um, but I use it as a way to sound like a sounding board, right? So just like I would use colleagues previously and still do, but it's an easy way. It's like takes 30 seconds. I just kind of write down my thoughts and say, hey, help me understand if this is the right level of thinking. Give me a pro argument, give me a con argument, just so I can get a more rounded picture on how I'm thinking about things strategically and or thinking about things within the portfolio. I've also used it for, I like stream of conscious writing out emails, for example, right? And if there's like a certain audience I'm trying to like tailor it to, I will just take that and just feed it into Copilot and say, hey, this is the audience I'm trying to send it to. Format this in a way that's more digestible, more understandable if it's an executive audience, or continue like provide detail or like detail this out into some sort of outline if it's a more detailed thing that I need to provide to, the working team, for example. So there's different ways that I've tried to use it just from a work setting. I have also this is where I don't really necessarily have a lot of trust yet, because it doesn't have necessarily access to a lot of our files and our level of thinking. But like you start asking it strategic questions, it's going off of what it can scrape from the web or what it can scrape from sources that are not yours, right? So that's where I become a little bit hesitant or reluctant to use some of that information coming back. But like if you needed a quick, hey, I need to download on this segment of, the market, right? I need to understand how these players are playing within this. What's a SWOT analysis? That's something that I've done, SWOT analysis. So just to give you a quick reference of like the players, what strengths and weaknesses are, and give me a starting place so that I can kind of take it.
Interesting. Does it have memory? Does it remember
If
the
you
previous prompts and the previous conversations that you've had?
you can go back into the prompt and then continue your. I create new prompts with everything. I've seen people just have one prompt and just keep going.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, that the best way to do it is basically use the same thread, because then it has the memory. So let's say you spoke to it about something a week back.
Yeah,
Now, if you ask it again, which has on the similar topic, it'll remember what you had told it about that, and then it'll give you the prompt. So it becomes very contextual then. So
interesting.
otherwise, every time you
Is
have to
there a way
start from a
to
blank slate.
aggregate them?
Yeah.
Yeah,
ChatGPT does it. I don't know about Microsoft Copilot, but
yeah,
ChatGPT has this feature where in the plus plan, which is there, it basically has the memory of the whole space. So any thread, whatever you write, it'll remember. And the next time you prompt it, it remembers your preferences, what you had asked, and then it'll give you answers according to that. So if you say, "Hey, if you tell them that, hey, this is the company that I've been targeting, or I've been speaking about, let's say we're doing a little bit of corporate analysis, and I gave
yeah.
a little bit of this thing, little bit of context saying that, hey, this is the industry that I'm focusing on right now. Next time around, when you prompt it for anything, it'll remember that fact and it'll give you
Interesting.
the context, which is basis
What
your
have you found to
conversation there.
be one of the more effective um, models that are out there?
So ChatGPT is one. Second tool, if you're in BD, you should go in for is something known as Crystal Knows, Knows. Crystal, Knows. It's a Google Chrome extension. Um, it is uncanny. It is eerie. So you just uh, you just install it on your browser, and you open anybody's LinkedIn, and he'll tell you the personality of that person. And if you're speaking to him for the first time, what does he like? How should you speak to him? You should be direct, you should be casual. And it is eerie how correct it is. Just by analyzing your profile, it can tell you what should be your starting discussion point, how should you greet him, you should be direct, you should be casual. It'll give you everything end to end. It'll give you a proper personality map of
Based
what
on
this
just
person
their
is.
LinkedIn profile?
Yeah. It's a Google Chrome extension. You're browsing, it'll just pop up. You can just click a button and it'll tell you that this is.
Sohail, this is I'm in this industry, but it's also like how scary this is.
Yeah.
Also, which is it's it's amazing how you start thinking about. I don't want to get into like the apocalyptic stuff, but like the what makes us human at the end of the day, right? Like what's going to make Sohail versus now this bot or this agent, whatever you want to call it, knows everything about you. Now, who's Sohail now?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. See, what I've realized is our time in this world is finite, but the civilization is going to continue in different forms, right? So our grandparents were more physical people. We are more
Yeah,
intellectual people. Our generation, so our kids and their kids, so our grandkids
yeah.
are technically going to be one of the dumbest generations out there, because they would not need to use their brains for anything. Everybody will have a smart assistant or a robot working with them, walking by. And see, I mean, it's if you actually look at, I don't know how much you read comic books and all, but in the 1910s, 1920s, if you, and there are magazines which people used to write, this is how the future would be like in the 1910s, 1920s. You look back at that time and you will realize that they didn't know how our lives would be right now. People were more physical then, everybody used to play. Everybody used to read. Now things have changed completely. We're not the working kind, we're not the physical kind anymore.
Yeah.
But 100 years down the line, people will not be intellectual anymore. So, world's gonna change, man. World's changing, and I always say this, it's the best of times and it's the worst of times.
Yeah.
You know,
100%.
the world is, it's in a very, it's in a, what do you call it? It's in a flux right now. You know, everything's changing, both geopolitically, technologically, people around, the way we interact with each other, the platforms have changed. We just have to adapt. The way I look at it, I think it's, you should just be able to see 5 steps ahead of you, and that's going to take you out of the forest. You don't need to worry about how long the road is, otherwise we'll just screw yourself. There are a few questions we wanted to ask, but I think we can let that be. I think we are also running short of time. Ashwin, how was your experience?
It was great. Yeah, no, this was fun. Definitely love speaking about kind of my full career experience, but then personal, professional, and AI, obviously within healthcare, especially, is becoming a hot topic. I mean, AI is a hot topic everywhere, but
Yeah,
um, I love talking about this stuff, and this is part and parcel to why I think this is the right field for me, because I get super jazzed about this. I think there's so much opportunity within the healthcare space, and frankly, there's a bit of an ideological bend to this for myself, which is I may not be a doctor, but I could potentially help as it relates to healthcare outcomes, and that's pretty exciting as well.
yeah.